Have you ever wondered why some women command a man's attention without uttering a single word, while others beg and plead and still remain invisible to his heart? Jung would have called this the dance of shadows, where the unconscious speaks, louder than the tongue, and where silence itself becomes a weapon sharper than desire. Men, in their unspoken fragility, are disarmed not by arguments or explanations, but by the subtle, invisible power that a woman holds when she understands herself. It is not the loud ones who move mountains inside a man's soul, but those who, in silence, embody the mystery of the eternal feminine. Every man lives with an unacknowledged fear, the fear of being abandoned, unseen, or irrelevant to the woman he longs for. He may pretend to dominate, to chase, to control, but beneath the armor of masculine bravado lies a vulnerable boy terrified of losing the gaze that validates his worth. When a woman learns to turn that gaze inward, to look at herself with reverence, instead of constantly feeding his ego, she unlocks the first weapon. Silence becomes magnetic. Detachment becomes irresistible. It is not absence that torments him, but the realization that he no longer governs her attention. Jung described this as the collapse of projection, the moment when a man realizes the goddess he worshipped in a woman is no longer his possession, but her own eternal archetype. A woman who retreats into her stillness is not weak. She is dangerous. Her quietness forces a man to wrestle with himself, to sit in the raw emptiness that echoes louder than her voice ever could. He begins to hear his own unhealed wounds screaming inside him. He wonders why her silence stings more than her words. And in that wondering, his obsession grows. You listening now must understand. Silence is not the absence of communication. It is the most potent form of it. When you choose not to respond, when you no longer argue or justify, you hold a mirror to his soul, and most men cannot bear what they see. The second weapon is the energy of feminine mystery. Men are hunters of the unknown. They are intoxicated by what they cannot fully claim or predict. A woman who reveals everything, her fears, her secrets, her desperate need for reassurance, becomes predictable. But a woman who embodies mystery awakens a man's unconscious hunger for discovery. Jung would say she embodies the anima, the eternal feminine image that lures a man into the depths of his own psyche. Mystery is not about deception. It is about wholeness. When you do not reveal all of yourself, you force him to chase not your body, but the enigma of your being. And in that chase, he becomes addicted to what he can never fully conquer. Third comes the weapon of self-possession. A woman who knows her worth carries an aura that cannot be touched. She is not loud about her value, she does not beg for love, and she does not collapse when faced with rejection. Instead, she walks with a stillness that says, "I am whole, with or without you." This quiet confidence is devastating to the male psyche, because men are wired to believe they complete a woman. When she no longer needs him to complete her, he either rises to meet her or crumbles under the weight of her independence. The Stoics wrote of this power centuries ago, to be unmoved by what is outside one's control. When a woman embodies Stoic calm, she becomes untouchable, and that untouchability is more alluring than any display of beauty. The fourth weapon is restraint. In a world where many give themselves away too quickly, emotionally, physically, spiritually, the woman who restrains herself becomes unforgettable. She's not easily swayed, not easily impressed, not easily seduced by empty words. Her standards create gravity. A man feels he must elevate himself to be near her, or risk losing her entirely. Jung spoke of individuation as the path to becoming whole. For a man, the presence of such a woman forces him toward his own individuation. He cannot remain shallow in the presence of her depth. Your restraint, your refusal to be conquered easily, becomes the silent law that governs the dynamic. And finally, the fifth weapon, detachment from outcome. This is perhaps the rarest and most lethal. When a woman no longer clings to the fantasy of what could be, when she surrenders the illusion of control, she moves beyond fear. She can love deeply without attachment, walk away without resentment, and remain radiant whether pursued or abandoned. Men are enslaved by this energy because they cannot manipulate it. They are accustomed to women who beg, plead, and bargain with love. But the one who does not fear losing him becomes the one. He cannot stop chasing. Her power lies in her freedom. Her silence is not punishment, it is liberation, both for herself and, paradoxically, for him. These 5 weapons are not tricks or games. They are states of being that emerge when a woman stops outsourcing her worth to a man's validation. They are born when she does the shadow work, confronts her own fears of abandonment, and learns to stand sovereign in her femininity. She becomes not just a woman, but an archetype, the embodiment of strength, mystery, and spiritual allure. And it is this archetype that men, whether they admit it or not, can never resist. He will never admit it out loud, but every man is haunted by the woman who mastered these silent weapons. She becomes a permanent figure in his memory, not because she gave him everything, but because she withheld what was most valuable, her surrender to his ego. Jung observed that men often project their unlived life onto women, seeing in them the qualities they cannot cultivate in themselves. Thus, when a woman steps into her power, when she no longer bends to his moods or validates his insecurities, she threatens the fragile structure of his identity. What you must realize is that his obsession is not with you alone, but with the part of himself he discovers in your presence. Men are drawn, sometimes against their will, to the kind of feminine energy that forces them into confrontation with their own shadow. The shadow, Jung wrote, is everything a man denies or represses about himself, the vulnerability he hides, the dependency he resents, the longing he disowns. A silent woman, self-contained and poised, becomes the mirror reflecting all of this. Back at him. He cannot bear to see his weaknesses, yet he cannot look away. This tension is what creates the strange intoxication that feels like obsession. The more he struggles to control her, the more powerless he feels. And the more powerless he feels, the more his hunger grows. This is the paradox of attraction that few women understand. Words, pleading, and confrontation rarely penetrate the masculine ego. They only feed its defenses. But silence, stillness, and self-possession slip past his armor and pierce the unconscious directly. He cannot fight what he cannot name. He cannot resist what he cannot predict. He is undone not by her arguments, but by her absence, her refusal, her mystery. If you have ever noticed a man chasing the woman who pays him the least attention, this is why. The ego craves to conquer what feels unconquerable, and yet there is danger here. For some men, this encounter with feminine silence awakens growth. It pushes them toward their own individuation, their own journey into wholeness. For others, it provokes rage, manipulation, or desperate attempts to reassert control. This is why silence must never be used as a game, but as a reflection of true inner strength. A woman who feigns detachment will be exposed. A woman who genuinely detaches becomes untouchable. The difference is authenticity. The unconscious, Jung reminds, us always knows the truth. You may ask yourself, what is the true cost of carrying such weapons? It is not without sacrifice. To embody mystery, restraint, and detachment, a woman must first face her own wounds. The fear of abandonment, the terror of being unseen, the craving for validation. These wounds whisper to her to chase, to explain, to cling. To resist them requires shadow work. It requires staring into the abyss of loneliness and choosing wholeness anyway. Only then can she wield silence not as a tactic, but as an extension of her essence. When she reaches this state, something remarkable happens. Her presence becomes like a gravitational field, pulling men into her orbit without effort. She does not seduce. She simply exists in her fullness, and existence itself becomes irresistible. The Stoics spoke of the man who cannot be shaken by external events as free. In the same way, the woman who cannot be shaken by a man's presence or absence becomes sovereign. Her power is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is the power of still water that reflects everything but is moved by nothing. And men, whether strong or broken, are compelled to test themselves against this kind of woman. To be near her feels like standing before something eternal, something beyond flesh, beyond romance, beyond the ordinary games of love and loss. She becomes the anima incarnate, the archetype that draws a man into confrontation with his own soul. He may fight her, he may chase her, he may even abandon her, but he will never forget her. For the truth is this: a woman who has mastered these weapons is unforgettable, not because of what she gave, but because of what she withheld. Not because she conformed to his desires, but because she dared to remain herself. And every man, no matter how powerful, secretly longs for a woman who cannot be broken by his power. There comes a moment, often unnoticed, when a man begins to realize that his longing is no longer about the woman herself, but about the way she makes him feel powerless in the face of her inner freedom. Jung once wrote that no one can become whole without encountering the opposite within themselves. For men, this often comes through a woman who refuses to be consumed by their ego. She is not simply a lover. She becomes the catalyst for his inner reckoning. Her silence, her mystery, her refusal to bend, force him into the shadowed chambers of his own psyche where he must face what he has long denied. It is here, in this tension, that the game of attraction transforms into something deeper, more dangerous. When a man feels a woman slipping beyond his control, he is thrown into conflict between the ego's demand to dominate and the soul's yearning to unite. His conscious mind whispers, "Win her back, make her submit." But his unconscious whispers, "She is your mirror, your guide, your anima." He cannot decide whether to pursue her for conquest or surrender to the transformation she represents. And in this chaos, his obsession deepens. Some women do not realize the potency of this position. They mistake their silence for weakness, their detachment for indifference. But what they hold is a kind of sacred fire. When wielded with clarity, it burns away illusion and forces truth into the open. A man can pretend he does not care about her words. He cannot pretend he does not care about her absence. And this absence, when chosen by a woman who knows her worth, becomes unbearable. It is not rejection that haunts him. It is the haunting possibility that she exists without him, that her world continues to turn, radiant and whole, untouched by his existence. This realization unsettles the masculine ego more than betrayal, more than criticism, more than rejection. Why? Because the ego is built on the illusion of being needed. Men crave to be a woman's center, her source of joy, her reason for being. When she proves otherwise, when she chooses her own soul over his presence, he is left naked, stripped of the illusions that once protected him. It is not her cruelty that wounds him, it is her sovereignty. Consider what the Stoics taught. Freedom is found in indifference to what one cannot control. The woman who embodies this wisdom becomes untouchable. She does not wait by the door for his return. She does not replay his words searching for hidden meanings. She does not collapse into despair when his affection falters. Instead, she sits in stillness, grounded in her own essence, and lets the storm rage outside her. And the storm always returns to her, because men are drawn irresistibly to what they cannot destroy. But here lies a profound truth. Such power is not for the faint of heart. To hold silence, when every fiber of your being wants to scream, requires courage. To embody mystery when you long to be fully known, demands discipline. To detach from outcome when your heart aches for closeness, requires faith. These silent weapons are not about manipulation, they are about mastery. A woman who uses them without grounding will fall into games, illusions, and self-deception. But a woman who has faced her own darkness, who has stitched together the broken fragments of her heart, wields them effortlessly because they are no longer tactics. They are who she is, and the man feels this difference. He may not know how to name it, but he senses it in the marrow of his being. He knows when silence is born of fear, and he knows when silence is born of power. The former he ignores, the latter he cannot escape. Her silence becomes the sound of his own soul calling him higher, asking him to confront the truths he has long buried. It is not merely attraction anymore. It is initiation. Men, even those who appear strong, crumble in the face of such initiation. Some rise, some flee, some return over and over, unable to sever the invisible thread. And each time, the woman's silence, her detachment, her self-possession, draws him deeper into the labyrinth of his own psyche. He begins to realize that he does not pursue her to possess her. He pursues her because, in her presence, he glimpses the man he has not yet become. This is why Jung insisted that relationships are not merely about romance, but about transformation. The woman who embodies these silent weapons becomes more than a partner. She becomes the threshold of a man's evolution. She awakens him, not through words, not through persuasion, but through the silent authority of her being. And whether he loves her, hates her, or loses her, she leaves him forever changed. There is a peculiar torment that settles into a man's chest when he realizes he is no longer the axis around which a woman's world turns. He may have tasted her affection once, may have basked in the warmth of her presence, but when she withdraws, not in bitterness, but in calm, something inside him fractures. Jung taught that the psyche is not destroyed by conflict, but by meaninglessness. And so, when she no longer reacts, when she no longer defends or explains, he feels the meaning of his dominance dissolving into silence. His conquest is void, his authority an illusion, and his ego begins to crumble under its own weight. This is where the woman's restraint proves more powerful than any confrontation. Restraint is not repression, it is sovereignty. It is the knowledge that her energy is sacred and must not be scattered in every battle. every quarrel, every emotional storm. By choosing when and where to engage, she asserts a mastery over herself that radiates outward, disarming him more effectively than any words could. To withhold response is to show him the limits of his control. And limits are what men secretly both crave and fear. Without them, he wanders unchecked in his impulses. With them, he is forced to grow. The man senses this limit, and it terrifies him. He knows he cannot break her resolve. He knows she does not beg. He knows her worth does not hinge on his presence. And so, instead of feeling victorious, he feels haunted. It is a haunting that lingers in the silent hours of the night, when distractions fade, and the echo of her absence grows louder than her voice ever did. This haunting is the invisible bond he cannot sever, because it does not bind him to her, it binds him to the unhealed parts of himself she awakened. Jung called this the confrontation with the anima, the archetypal feminine figure within every man. When a woman refuses to be consumed by his ego, she embodies the anima in its purest, most elusive form. She reminds him that he is incomplete, that he cannot possess what is eternal, that he cannot reduce her essence to a role or a label. He begins to chase not the woman herself, but the image of wholeness she represents. This is why his pursuit feels endless, why his hunger never ceases. He is not only after her body or her affection. He is after the missing fragments of his own soul. But the woman must guard herself carefully here, for the same energy that makes her irresistible also exposes her to projections. A man may idolize her, imagining her to be the answer to all his emptiness, and in that idolization, he robs her of humanity. He worships the archetype, not the woman, and when she fails to uphold his fantasy, his reverence can turn swiftly to resentment. This is the danger of feminine power. It evokes worship, but it also evokes fear. The man who cannot integrate his shadow will either cling to her obsessively or flee from her entirely. Yet the wise woman does not bend beneath either extreme. She does not bask in being worshipped, nor does she collapse under being resented. She remains herself, neither goddess nor demon, but sovereign spirit. She knows that his projections are not about her, but about his own unfinished work, and so she neither accepts nor rejects them. She lets them pass like shadows across water, never disturbing her depths. This depth is what men remember long after the surface has faded. They may forget her words, her laughter, even her beauty, but they do not forget the way she made them feel when she stood firm in her silence, when she embodied mystery, when she chose herself. That memory is indelible, carved into the psyche, resurfacing in unexpected moments of solitude. He may try to bury it beneath new conquests, new distractions, but it returns, as all shadows do, demanding recognition. And so, the woman who wields these weapons shapes more than just her own destiny. She shapes the inner lives of the men who cross her path. Some will grow because of her. Others will resist. But none will leave untouched. Her silence does not end the story. It becomes the story. Her detachment is not rejection. It is revelation. Her presence, her absence, her unshakable self-possession, these are the forces that etch her into memory and bind her to myth. A man who once believed himself invincible often learns humility at the feet of a woman who no longer needs him. It is not her anger that humbles him, nor her tears, nor her demands. Those he can dismiss. But when she carries herself with quiet certainty, when she radiates a self-sufficiency that makes his presence optional, he is struck with a truth more devastating than rejection. She is free. And freedom, when seen in the one he thought he possessed, exposes the chains in his own life. Jung would say that what unsettles him is not her independence alone, but the archetype it evokes. She becomes the symbol of everything untamed and eternal, a living embodiment of what his soul craves yet cannot master. She is no longer simply a woman. She is the anima unleashed, the mirror reflecting the completeness he has not yet reached. And this recognition shakes him to the core. For the first time, he realizes that love cannot be owned, that desire cannot be commanded, that power is nothing when faced with a spirit that refuses to kneel. Men are often drawn not to the women who adore them openly, but to those who love from a place of sovereignty. There is a profound difference between dependence and devotion. Dependence clings, fears, bargains. Devotion, by contrast, flows freely, without fear of loss. The woman who knows her worth can devote herself fully, but if abandoned, she does not collapse. She withdraws, she heals, she continues. And this terrifies the man, for it reveals that his role in her life was never her foundation, only her reflection. This is why her silence cuts deeper than any words could. Silence says, "I do not need to explain myself to you." Silence says, "Your actions speak louder than your excuses." Silence says, "I have chosen myself, and in choosing myself, I am beyond your reach." A man may rage against such silence, may provoke, accuse, or attempt to draw her back into battle, but every outburst only confirms his loss of power. She does not descend into the arena. She remains on the mountaintop, untouchable, watching his storms from above. The Stoics understood this truth well. The highest freedom is mastery over one's own reactions. A woman who practices this becomes more than alluring. She becomes formidable. Men cannot manipulate her with guilt, cannot bind her with flattery, cannot weaken her with fear. Her center is her own. And in this self-possession, she awakens the deepest hunger in him, the hunger to be worthy of her. Not because she demanded it, but because her very presence makes anything less intolerable. Yet there is a quiet warning within this power. If misused, it can harden into coldness, into walls so high no one can climb them. True feminine power is not the denial of love, but the refinement of it. It is the ability to give without losing oneself, to receive without becoming dependent, to love without clinging. The woman who learns this balance holds both fire and water within her. She can nurture, and she can destroy, but she chooses wisely when to do either. And this choice, more than beauty, more than charm, is what a man can never resist. He may tell himself he is drawn to her body, her smile, her voice. But beneath those lies a deeper truth. He is drawn to the abyss she represents. She forces him to question himself, to see where he has lived shallowly, where he has loved carelessly, where he has hidden from his own reflection. She is both temptation and teacher, both mystery and mirror. And he both hates and worships her for it. In the end, his obsession is not with the woman herself, but with what she awakens in him. And yet, because she was the vessel, because she was the one who embodied the mystery, she becomes unforgettable. He may move on in life, may take new lovers, may build new worlds. But when he lies awake in the silence of his own thoughts, it is her face, her absence, her stillness that returns. She is not remembered for the things she said, but for the things she did not. And she, if she has truly done the work, does not live for his remembrance. She lives for herself, For the woman who wields silence, mystery, restraint, self-possession, and detachment has already won the only battle that matters, the battle within. She does not chase, she does not beg, she does not cling. She simply is. And that being is the most dangerous, most irresistible force of all. The woman who knows. Her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.